Hi, and welcome everybody to A&F Conversations. My name is Megan Rapinoe. My pronouns are she and her. I am so excited to be here with you today, and I have an amazing guest. We're going to be talking about all things overcoming adversity, body positivity, and self-love. So in that vein, give it up. Give a little love to Scout Bassett. Scout, welcome to the show, to the program, to the conversation. If you could just start, say your name and give your pronouns, and then we'll get right into it.
My name is Scout Bassett, and my pronouns are she and her.
Okay, so you're incredible. I've gotten to meet you a couple times now. I'm geeked about having this conversation. We'll start it a little bit light. How are you? I guess maybe not light. Just during these times, it's a very unusual time. But how are you? What have you been up to in quarantine? And how is this moment landing on you? How are you doing?
Well, I am as geeked out about talking to you, such a fangirl of you. Let's see. This has been such a crazy time. As you know, I'm a Paralympian aiming for my second games in Tokyo. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. I'm not going to lie. Like at the beginning, I was super strong and I felt really okay about everything, like running a ton of miles, staying fit. And then sort of as the months went on, I sort of found myself like just being drained by this time, and the longer it's gone on, and part of it is it just feels so far away because, when this all happened, when it first began, I was about to kick off my season. Like we had to meet 2 weeks later, before everything shut down. And so to be able, to go through this whole like going back and starting at the drawing board and figuring out what's next and okay, not only that, but now you got to stay motivated and you got to keep working for another year. So there's been a lot of ups and downs, but I finally feel like I've recently hit a groove and excited about what's ahead.
Amazing. Yeah, this is a trying time to say the least. There's so much adversity. You are no stranger to adversity. You've had an incredible amount of adversity in your life. I would love to know just a little bit about your upbringing. Yes. You were adopted at the age of 8, I believe, by people here, by your parents here in America. You were originally born in China. And you lost your leg at 18 months. Is that correct? In a chemical fire. Can you just talk a little bit about, your upbringing and overcoming adversity at such a young age? And are there things that you still do to this day to overcome adversity? I know we're talking about, COVID and trying to keep preparing. It's hard enough to prepare for the Olympics, as you know. In the best of times, but this is certainly a very trying time. So just take us through a little bit about your upbringing and sort of how you approach adversity in your everyday life.
Oh gosh. Okay. You might need a little drink. I'm just kidding. So there's been so much, let's see, when I was a baby, I was involved in a fire, and that's how I lost my right leg. And shortly after that, I was just left on the streets in China, found at 1.5 years old, and taken to a government orphanage where I lived for the next 7 years, never leaving the premises of that place. So never having a perspective of the outside world beyond that property that we lived on, and no access to media of any sort. And I can say that the trauma, the pain, the despair that I endured as a young girl are things that are almost unspeakable for a child to go through. And I don't think it was until I was older, until I realized like how much trauma I went through and how it impacted the rest of my life, even from an emotional and mental standpoint, because at that time, you're just living in a fight or flight mode. And that's how my everyday life was. And I'm really fortunate that I was adopted and came to America at almost 8 years old. And I knew early on in my childhood that my journey was going to be very difficult and different than most people. but I can look back now and be thankful for all the experiences, the hardships, the trials, because I know that I have the courage, the strength, the determination that I have today because of what I've gone through. So I'm really thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. You talked about having a disability. You said you lost your leg in a chemical fire when you were very young. But you can do things that, like, people who are able-bodied or who don't have a disability wouldn't even dream of doing. How do you think about the able-bodied versus not, or your ability or not? Clearly, you have all the ability you need to be one of the best in the world, and just to truly be an exceptional athlete, an exceptional human being. And part of our conversation today is about body positivity and self-love. How has that journey sort of unfolded for you? And how do you think and define ability for yourself when maybe the outside world, at least, traditionally in your life, has told you, well, you have a disability and you can't do this, you can't do this. But really, your experience and what you're doing in the world is not really telling you that, because you do incredible things every single day.
Well, I think it's, everything that I have done in my life, I want to be an example. I want to provide hope for, in particular, a group of people that have not had a lot of that. I think most people would be surprised to learn that outside of COVID circumstances, people with disabilities make up the largest unemployment group in this country. So far greater than any racial demographic, but that is the biggest group of unemployed Americans are people with disabilities. They're 3 times less likely as somebody not with a disability to go to college and get an education. And that even despite the 30 years we're celebrating the Americans with Disabilities Act this year, but in spite of that, there's so much discrimination and prejudice still facing people with disabilities that are not afforded the same opportunities. You can hire somebody with a disability and actually legally pay them below the minimum wage because they have a disability. And that's allowed. And because of the disability benefits, you cannot get married. Because if you make an income combined over a certain amount of money, you don't get your benefits. So there's not even marriage equality for people with disabilities. And there's just so many issues. And I think growing up, I was largely aware of the no's, because I heard 1,000 no's growing up of all the things I couldn't do and couldn't be. And I remember in 7th grade, a junior high teacher had spoken about the dreams of things that I wanted to do and knowing that one day I would do something great. And she said to me that I needed to know my limits because I probably wouldn't become a whole lot. And I remember that just hanging on to that in 7th grade and having that as such great motivation for me, because that is so much of how people saw me, and I think just from a body standpoint, I did ESPN, which I know you did too, with Sue, the body issue last year. And it was such a bold step for me because so much of our culture and society, not just here in the States, but as I've traveled the world, views in particular women with disabilities in a very different way. We see men with disabilities as being heroic, celebrated, honorable. They are mostly the roles that we see in media and entertainment. But we rarely see women celebrated in that way. And I think it's largely because we have such a focus on bodily perfection, right? What is beautiful, what is sexy. And when we see things that our eye is not trained to see, such as somebody that is missing an appendage and wears a very archaic, masculine-looking prosthetic, we don't see that as being a version of perfection that our eyes are trained to see. And so a big part of why I did the body issue is because I wanted girls, I wanted young women, women in general to know that it doesn't matter what you look like. Even if you don't fit the definition of this perfection, but that for me, I have burns from my waist down. Obviously, I have a very apparent prosthetic. And those things are the things that give me such strength and power, and in itself tells a really beautiful story that gives you that beauty. And I just want people to be able to own that and to know that you don't have to change who you are. You don't have to cover up these things to fit in, and to see yourself as being worthy and of having tremendous value.
That is such an important message really for all people, whether you're able-bodied or differently abled or whatever it may be, whether you're gay or black or white or a woman, that just self-love of we are all different. Yeah. We're not the same. Even the person who you think is perfectly fit to be beautiful or whatever it is fits into this stereotype. We all have something that's different. And it's interesting because I feel like we know this, like each individual knows very much that they're not perfect. They see things on their body or, in whatever it is that they're like, I don't really like that. Everyone kind of knows that. And yet what the world tells us is that this is what's perfect and this is how you do it and this is who you should be and this is how you're going to be happy. And that's just a sort of great lie almost that we've all been told. If you could go back, I guess, and talk to your younger self, but in talking to your younger self, you're speaking to a whole generation of kids now who are like you or have gone through experiences like you or have, something different about them, whether it's something physical or something in their mind or something different. What would you say to them and what do you want them to know? And what do you want the world to know about them, really?
Well, my message is something that I think you do so well and that I really admire about you. And that's really just owning the fullness of who you are. Despite the differences, despite whether you fit a definition or not. I had a really hard time with this growing up. I always wore a cosmetic cover over my prosthetic and painted it this ridiculous skin tone, which didn't even match my anatomical limit. I don't know who I was fooling, but would wear, pants or long skirts if I had to even wear a dress of some sort in the middle of summer, hot, humid Michigan summers. And I just covered all of that, because I wasn't ready. I didn't have the confidence or the strength to really own who I am and to not be ashamed. And I think that in these times and just in the world that we live in, there's still a lot of young kids that really struggle with that element of being ashamed of who they are, being embarrassed because they don't look like everybody else, or whatever struggles they're going through. Even if it's not physical, there are so many challenges and struggles people face that aren't visible, right? And whatever that is, I think there's still this idea that we have to hide it and conceal it. And I want young kids and women in particular to know that you don't need to hide any of that. To be yourself in a world like this is the most beautiful and powerful message that you can send. And that you don't need to be perfect. And I think that's one of the things I really admire and have just gotten so much strength from you in, is that you really own who you are and you give zero F's about what people think. And I think that as a young person, that's a really hard thing. That's the most common thing I get question from young people is having the confidence to just be myself, to own whatever I am. And that it takes a bold step, to be able to do so. And for me, I was able to do that when I found running. And there was no way I could conceal my running blade. There was no way I could make it look like an anatomical limb. And that was when I had to really confront who I am and say, I'm not going to be ashamed of what I look like or where I come from or my story. And most importantly, the things that you cannot change about yourself, just to own that. So I really admire that you do that so well.
Well, thank you. That is very sweet of you to say. I feel the same about you. I love that when you do walk into a room and you're proud of who you are, you bring so much with you. You bring so much visibility and representation with you. It really, really is incredible to see. You're elite at what you do. Any sort of conversation around disability is just ridiculous because you have all the ability in the world, and showing up in these spaces and using your voice, not only to advocate for yourself, but to advocate for so many other people around the world is just amazing. I just thank you so much for joining us in this conversation about overcoming adversity and body positivity and self-love. It really is just so important. I hope that all of the viewers who watch this will continue to have these conversations with friends and families and strangers alike. Hopefully you learned something today, either about yourself or someone else, that allows you to go out into the world with a much more open heart and willing to have these conversations, because they really do matter so very much. So, Scout, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such an honor to be able to speak with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for leading the way.
Of course.